Hello everyone and welcome to my top 10 best games of 2014. Now this list is made up of the games that I enjoyed playing the most this year. So if a game you liked isn't on the list, well, I might not have played it or I might not have enjoyed my time with it. Take Alien Isolation for example. While it might be an excellent horror game, I personally don't enjoy horror games that much, so it didn't make it onto my list. Also, since I'm a PC gamer only, I didn't get the chance to play any of the console exclusives this year. So games which probably would have gotten a spot, like Bayonetta 2, I sadly missed out on. But with that out of the way, let's move on to the list. Number 10, Endless Legend. After the somewhat disappointing release of Civilization Beyond Earth, I stumbled upon another 4X strategy game called Endless Legend, which I had personally heard very little about, but what I found quite surprised me. So like in most 4X strategy games, you'll build up an empire with the aim of conquering the world in a variety of different ways, but Endless Legend has some surprising mechanical depth to it. Take the factions for example. Unlike in other games where each faction might gain a small bonus compared to each other, in Endless Legend each of the factions are very different, and your whole playstyle can change depending on what faction you choose. For example, one of the factions doesn't eat food, it eats dust, which is basically the game's equivalent of money. So you'll need to focus a lot more on making money and less on the production of food, which can impact such things as your starting location and what alliances you make. You'll also gain heroes while playing, which you then in turn can gain new equipment for by going on side quests, which will pop up time to time, kind of like mini objectives. The game is also beautiful to look at, with a great amount of detail, not only on the units and map, but even on the UI. All of these little additions, backed up by solid gameplay mechanics, make Endless Legend an easy recommendation if you're a fan of the 4X genre. Number 9, Transistor. As the follow-up title to the excellent 2011 action RPG Bastion, Transistor had a lot to live up to, but I am glad to say it definitely delivers. The game has an amazing and detailed art style, which combined with the fantastic soundtrack that is easily my second favourite of the year, it made Transistor a very in-depth and immersive experience. I played the game from start to finish and didn't even notice the time passing. Transistor also has a vastly improved combat system compared to Bastion, with the introduction of the tactical combat system, which adds a lot of depth by allowing you to pause time and plan out your moves, and then watch them play out in real time. You can choose not to use this system if you want to, if you're looking for a more action orientated focus, but I would recommend using it as it did make the combat a lot more interesting, at least to me personally. But overall, I found the game to be compelling, if somewhat on the shorter side, which is probably the only complaint I have about Transistor. It is a very short experience, and I would have liked it to go into greater detail about the world and the people in it. I think there's a greater story they could have told there. But the quality of the game easily makes up for its somewhat lack of quantity. So if you're looking for a short but excellent experience, I would definitely recommend Transistor. Number 8, Dark Souls 2. Now I'm a huge fan of the original Dark Souls. It is one of my most favourite RPGs of all time. So I was really looking forward to Dark Souls 2, and I expected it to be my game of the year. But in many ways, Dark Souls 2 is a step back compared to the original, which was disappointing. Don't get me wrong, it's still a good game. It has a large open world to explore, countless enemies to fight, and dangerous bosses to challenge, all tied together with the brutal and unforgiving combat we know the Souls games for. So you might be asking, well, why is it a disappointment then? Well, the simplest way to put it would be that I found it lacking the quality, attention to detail, and immersion that the original game had. For example, in the original Dark Souls, you were always trying to fight your way through to get to the next section, but most of the time you'd end up failing and dying. But it never really felt unfair, so you had the desire to keep trying to push forward. Dark Souls 2, on the other hand, feels far more forced, both in its storytelling and its difficulty. There were many times during my playthrough that my frustration became greater than my enjoyment or desire to push on. So I don't think that they put together a very cohesive experience. It all felt like it was cut up into chunks. So while I can still recommend Dark Souls 2, I would say if you want the best experience, to go and start with the original Dark Souls if you can. Number 7. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Now when I heard this game was being ported to PC, I was very happy, because I enjoy spectacle fighters quite a bit, and there aren't that many of them around. So as you would expect from a spectacle fighter, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance has fast-paced, over-the-top combat. In fact, it has the best combat of any spectacle fighter I've played besides the original Bayonetta. The main standout feature of the combat is Blade Mode, a mechanic that allows you to slow down time and manually slice your enemies into little pieces. It will even tell you how many pieces you cut them into. It's super satisfying to use, even if it takes a little bit of time to get used to. The game also has, in my opinion, the best and most kick-ass soundtrack of the year, which added greatly to my enjoyment of the game. And it made every boss fight memorable as well, as they each had their own special track that would play during the fight. The story is super cheesy, but that fits the game's style perfectly, and it also has some really odd characters. My only complaint with Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance would be that, like Transistor, it is a pretty short experience, but it's a ton of fun regardless, and definitely worth picking up. Number 6. Hearthstone: Heroes of Warcraft. Ever since I was a kid, I have loved collectible card games, everything from Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh! And eventually Magic: The Gathering, which has been my go-to card game for the last few years. Now, I remember when Hearthstone was first announced. Everyone was like, "Really, Blizzard? Your big announcement is a free-to-play card game?" And most people were disappointed. But once the beta came around, I've never seen so many people trying to get access into the beta of a game. Even an esports scene has sprung up around Hearthstone since its release. Yes, it can be simple when compared to something like Magic: The Gathering, but that is one of Hearthstone's biggest strengths. It's easy to learn, and because of that it has drawn in a massive player base already. I myself have put more time into Hearthstone than any other game this year. Now, it is true, if you plan on really getting into Hearthstone long term, you're probably going to have to put down some money on card packs to speed up the building of your collection. But the game is free, and it's just so polished and well made that I never regretted spending money on it, and since it is free, I definitely recommend you at least give it a go. Number 5. Wolfenstein The New Order. When I first saw Wolfenstein The New Order, I wasn't very interested in it, because it looked to be a generic FPS, which was disappointing, because that's not what the Wolfenstein games have been. But I am glad to say I was wrong. Wolfenstein The New Order is anything but generic. The game is set in an alternate reality where the Nazis managed to win the Second World War through the use of advanced technology and now rule the world. This is reflected through everything in the game. You'll cross paths with enemies ranging from Nazi super soldiers to giant mechanical dogs. You can also listen to famous songs which have been remade into Nazi versions, along with reading newspapers which will tell the story of what happened during and after the war. This combined with an excellent story with great characters and writing, as well as a masterfully crafted world with excellent level design, which is not common among modern FPS, all tied together with good gunplay and a variety of interesting locations. You'll even travel to Nazi bases on the moon. I think that Wolfenstein, in my opinion, is one of the best single player FPS in a long time. It's a lot of fun and an easy recommendation. Number 4, South Park The Stick of Truth. Now this game could have very easily been a total pile of crap, like most TV and movie license games end up being. But what we got instead is an amazing South Park RPG. The game manages to capture the art style of the show so well that while playing the game, you feel like you're watching your own personal season of the show. This, combined with the excellent South Park style writing and humour, really makes it feel like they made a real effort to do the licensed material justice. On top of that, the gameplay itself is excellent, containing plenty of things to loot and items to find for customizing your own personal South Park character, interesting quests and characters, all of which are tied back into the show itself, and a very well done turn-based combat system with a lot of interesting techniques and synergies tying it all together. The only downside I would give in regards to the game is that it's pretty short for an RPG, and if you don't like South Park, then you're probably not going to like The Stick of Truth, as it is very faithful to the source material. But otherwise, it's one of the best licensed games we've probably ever had. So well done to Obsidian Entertainment, and I hope other developers follow this fine example of how to do licensed games properly. Number 3, Middleearth, Shadow of Mordor. Now, leading up to launch, Shadow of Mordor looked like just a generic cross between Assassin's Creed and Batman, both of which I'm a little tired of now. But what I found quite surprised me. So, as most of your time is going to be spent in combat fighting orcs or travelling around Mordor, let's get the similarities out of the way first. Yes, the combat system is not as deep as the Batman games, but it is still pretty good, and it contains some really interesting abilities, like being able to teleport across the battlefield, cutting everyone's heads off. And yes, the free running system is not quite as good as Assassin's Creed, but it does allow a great deal of freedom and exploration. But that's where the similarities to those games end, and we come to the more standout features of the game, which is the Nemesis system. What the Nemesis system is a mechanic that allows orcs in the world to remember their interactions with you. For example, if a no-name orc kills you, he will grow stronger, gain reputation, and be promoted. He'll also remember you the next time you cross his path. Also, let's say you burn an orc in a fight and he escapes. Well, he could return later on with burn scars, and he'll even comment on it, like, "Last time we met, you burned me. This time around, you'll be the one feeling the pain." It's an excellent system with a lot of depth that really brings the world to life. This, combined with a great, if somewhat short story, makes this a damn good time. I just wish they'd focused a little more on fleshing the story out and having less of an abrupt and disappointing end. This is 2014, the final bosses of games should not be defeated with QTE events. Number 2, Divinity Original Sin. Originally a Kickstarter title, Divinity Original Sin is made in the style of old school RPGs like Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment. It has a massive amount of content, being the longest game I've played this year, as well as a great degree of player freedom and depth. For example, you could alter the story by killing off important NPCs, or finishing a quest in a variety of different ways, depending on how you went about completing it, as most quests will have multiple endings. The game is also littered with a great deal of loot and equipment to find to outfit and customize your characters, as well as a detailed leveling up system and an excellent turn-based combat system, which takes a surprising amount of degree for advantage of the environment around you. For example, if your enemies are standing in water, well, use a lightning bolt to do extra damage. If you have a large horde coming at you, funnel them into a choke point and then use a large AoE spell. The game even has multiplayer co-op with inbuilt mechanics, like being able to argue with the other player through in-game dialogue about what choices to make. It just has so much going for it that I can't recommend it enough. It was so close to being my game of the year, but it lost out by the tiniest amount. But it is still a damn fine RPG, that's for sure. Number 1, Dragon Age Inquisition. The Dragon Age franchise has been a bit of a roller coaster. Dragon Age Origins was, in my opinion, one of the best RPG in recent years. However, the follow-up, Dragon Age 2, was pretty mediocre. And now we have the third Dragon Age game, Dragon Age Inquisition. And as you might have guessed, considering it did receive my top spot on this list, it is a return to form for the series. Now, while not an open world, Inquisition does give you a number of large locations to explore, all of which are filled to the brim with loot, quests, secrets, you name it. In fact, some people have said it contains too much, bordering on an MMORPG style feel. I myself didn't get that feeling, but it is worth keeping in mind. Also, as you would expect of a BioWare RPG, it has a very well told story and a cast of interesting characters, which were my favourite out of any Dragon Age game so far. You will spend a great deal of time talking to these characters and learning about them and the world around you in great detail, which is something that the Dragon Age games have always done well, and that continues here. So for me, it's far closer to Dragon Age Origins than Dragon Age 2, and I think Origins is still slightly better because of the more focused story and questing. Inquisitions is still a step back in the right direction, no doubt about that, and it earns my Game of the Year award for 2014. And that pretty much wraps up this year's top 10 best games. I'll be putting up my top 10 most anticipated games of 2015 in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. I might also do a top 10 disappointing games. Let me know if you want to see that. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing. And thanks to everyone for watching, and I hope you all have a good day.